Hi, Shannon Waller here, and welcome to the Inside Strategic Coach podcast with Dan Sullivan. Dan, one of the key concepts we talk about in Strategic Coach, and really one of the purposes of Strategic Coach, is increased entrepreneurial freedom, how to expand entrepreneurial freedom. One of the things I really love is that you make a distinction between two different types of freedom. Mm-hmm. So what are the two, and how do you describe that?
Again, I'm pulling in here, I would say probably close to 50,000 hours of conversations that I've had in 44 years since 1974. Entrepreneurs who stay small, entrepreneurs who grow suddenly for a period of time and then stop, and then entrepreneurs who just keep growing. Entrepreneurism is my life. It's the area of activity on the planet that I'm most fascinated and motivated to develop my understanding, develop my ability to communicate about it, and my ability to actually create tools and concepts which help entrepreneurs continually grow. And it has to do with freedom. And first of all, just to differentiate entrepreneurs from the general population who are not entrepreneurs, there's a lot of cliche misunderstanding about what motivates entrepreneurs. And those who are not entrepreneurs generally think that they're only interested in money. But when you talk to entrepreneurs who are really successful, they hardly ever talk about money either as a goal or as an accomplishment. For really great entrepreneurs, money is just a means for gaining greater freedom. Now, back to freedom, and there's a biblical reference I'd like to use here, and it's from the book of Exodus, which is the story of Moses leading the children of Israel out of Egypt, and they go into what is now the Sinai Desert. They cross the Red Sea because there was no Suez Canal in those days, so they had to cross the Red Sea. And, it's explained in the Bible as a miracle and how it happens, but one of the most important stories of that is Moses, because Moses had great leadership skills, which allowed the children of Israel to free themselves up from the tyranny that they were experiencing in Egypt, and got to the desert, but then they didn't go any further than the desert with Moses as their leader. They needed a new leader who would take them into the promised land. So the short phrase that I use, that skills that get you out of Egypt aren't the ones that get you into the promised land. 99% of entrepreneurs have jumped into the marketplace on their own, which requires courage, and they create a freedom from employment, so they don't have to be employed. But they never go any further, really, than actually creating themselves a job where they're the boss. And maybe they have a small staff around them, but they're always still in the mindset of freeing themselves up from what they don't like, without going to the further step of actually saying, well, now that I've freed myself up from what I don't like, what am I now doing to free myself to be what I really, really want to be in the marketplace? So I would say that 99% of entrepreneurs that I've experienced, they actually never go further than freedom from. And my feeling is the real payoff for being an entrepreneur is to then expand your whole life and expand your freedom and to get the full benefit of freedom by being totally clear about what the freedom to, what is it that you actually want to do in the world now that you've declared independence and that you've achieved independence to a certain extent. Because if you don't now from inside of yourself give yourself a vision of value creation out in the marketplace, doing something that you absolutely love, which continually fascinates and motivates you, then you're always going to be referring backwards to what it was that you were freeing yourself up from.
Dan, that is so interesting. And one of the questions that comes to mind for me is, how do people figure out what their vision is, what they want to live into? Because I imagine it takes so much energy to escape the gravitational field of where they were before. That freedom from takes an enormous amount of energy. And I've met entrepreneurs who are in their business. Sometimes they're feeling quite trapped. They don't necessarily know how to escape, as one client said the other day. And they're not really clear on what their next thing is. And one of the expressions you've used, which I repeated to him, was it's not good when entrepreneurs run out of future.
Yeah.
And so how does an entrepreneur tap into what their freedom to is?
The big thing here is, to a certain extent, freedom from is really easy because the circumstances that are defining your freedom are coming from things that you don't like. So it's a negative model. And one of the mindsets that accompanies this when it becomes your lifetime approach is nobody's going to tell me what to do. Nobody's going to tell me what to do, This has enormous implications as far as what your support team looks like. Okay, so what I notice is that freedom from entrepreneurs treat their team members not as team members, but as almost like servants. Okay, and the job of the servants are just to do what the entrepreneur says. But the breakthrough for the entrepreneurs I've seen is where the team members actually become creative partners. Okay, and they become unique ability partners in the sense that they have unique abilities that you don't have. And therefore, the proper use of a unique ability teamwork is not to free yourself up from anything. It's actually to create something brand new that's twice, 5 times, 10 times bigger than you could ever do on your own as a single individual. And what that requires is that you have to make a switch from being the person who's in control to the person who's being in charge. Okay, so if anybody followed me for a week of my time when I'm in, let's say I'm in Toronto, and I'm spending 5 days in the office Monday through Friday, and I'm here, from normal business hours. I don't work long business hours. From the moment I come in on Monday morning until I leave on Friday night, I'm being managed by 5 or 6 different individuals who are saying, Dan, this is what you're doing next, this is what you're doing. And all through the week, I'm following the directions of managers who know the big game plans. So they know I'm in charge of a big vision, of what I'm trying to do. It's the 10 Times program. It's the new Game Changer program that we're starting in 2018. It's the podcast series that I'm doing with you. It's the books that we're writing together. It's the videos that I'm doing. But there's a manager in charge of every one of these projects who are very, very good at organizing things. And what they do is they simply tell me what my role is in this activity, and everything else is taken care of. All the setup, all the details, all the follow-up from the activity is handled by other people. And the reason is I'm not freeing myself up from anything. That happened a long time ago. I'm totally dedicated and totally focused in on a much bigger future for myself and for Strategic Coach and for our most ambitious entrepreneurs and Strategic Coach. So it's all about the future, and I have a role to play in creating this future, but I have to have an ever-expanding team of other unique abilities to actually pull this off. And so they know that what they're freeing me up from, each of them is freeing me up from, is anything that's not my unique ability.
Well, and it sounds like what you're so focused on is what you love and like to do and that you find gives you energy, it's creative, it's contributing, all of those things. And instead of being some external thing that you're resisting or pushing away from, it's so much more of an internal process than an external rebellion. As you were talking about, no one's going to make me do this. I thought rebel, that would be me when I was younger. So it's much more internal and much more creative to do the freedom to process rather than freedom from.
Well, the other thing is that the freedom from is you're going to wear out with it. You're going to wear out with it because you're reacting rather than creating. So you can take a reactive approach to your entrepreneurial career or a creative approach to your entrepreneurial career. And what's neat about those two words is that they have exactly the same letters. They're just rearranged. And that's really fundamentally what happens between the entrepreneurs who are simply freedom from and those who are freedom to, because that has everything to do with mindset. It has everything to do with communication. It has everything to do with who is actually doing crucial tasks in a much bigger project, rather than just one person saying, do this, do that, do that. After a while, you get tired of telling people, do this, do that. And it's much better to spend your future where other people have done a beautiful setup for you just to do what you love doing. I mean, just use our podcast as an example. You're the manager of the podcast. So 15 minutes before we started today, I came to the studio because I was told to come to the studio by my scheduling manager. And I came down and you laid out what we're going to talk about today. And you had spent time meeting with the marketing team, meeting with the program advisors, meeting with the coaches. And you had worked out that we're going to talk about 3 topics today. And all I have to do is come in. We talk a little bit before we come in about what we're going to talk about. It doesn't take very long, 5-10 minutes. And then I just sit here and you introduce me and you ask me questions and I talk. And today we're doing 15-minute podcasts. And then when I'm finished, I walk out and we're in our studio. We have our studio team here, our sound engineer who will make these sound very professional. We have Suvi, who's with our video team, and she's representing the marketing team, and all this will be packaged. But all I have to do is be in the studio, take part in a conversation to set it up, and then be in the interview. So this is a perfect example of, in the old days, I would have to do all this work myself, and now I don't have to do anything except do what I do really well, and that is answer your questions. And have a discussion going between the two of you. So there's enormous freedom, too, with me, and it's going back to my Monday to Friday model. I'm never doing anything that's not my unique ability, and I'm totally freed up from all non-unique ability activities. I'm not being freed up from employment because that happened 4 decades ago. I'm just freed up to create a bigger and better future.
Well, and to your point about, when you're in control, it's kind of exhausting. When you're in charge, it's actually incredibly energizing because you're just focused on being creative instead of reactive. There's an expansion to that, and new things become possible because your energy is never being depleted. You're not resisting against anything. You're just actually being completely supported to expand your vision into the future.
Yeah, and entrepreneurism is a rather new form of living economically because it operates in the economic marketplace. But as a thing that's more and more available to everybody, it's only been within the last 2 centuries, literally. In all of human history, it's only been within the last 2 centuries, and much more so over the last 30 or 40 years that you can become an entrepreneur. But if you're going to become an entrepreneur, get the full reward from, and the freedom from is a 1/10 payment. It's like a 10% payment. You're 10% better, but if you go all the way and you're not responding reactively, negatively to things that you don't like, but you're actually moving more and more fully towards things that you really love, seeing in the world, creating in the world, being involved with people who are enormously resonant with your ideas. That's a beautiful way to live your life.
It totally is. Dan, what are a couple first simple steps that people can take to move from freedom from and much more into freedom to?
The central changeover is you focusing on your unique ability and surrounding yourself with other individuals, a greater expansion of a team outward from the center of other people who have unique abilities of their own, but then have really big goals that are way beyond what you would do as a rugged individualist entrepreneur. You've essentially created a job for yourself.
I also really appreciate what you said about mindset and the shift from being in control to in charge and looking at other people as being strategic partners. Because if you do these things but don't shift how you're looking at it, it won't be successful.
Well, not only that, but you won't attract great people because great people will not be attracted to someone whose only ambition is to have a job. Great people want to be able to grow. They want to be able to expand themselves. So they are technically going to be in an employment situation, but they want an employment situation where it's just pure growth, that once they enter into the teamwork with the entrepreneur, then they will constantly grow and their dreams and their bigger goals can be accomplished within this teamwork. But if your only approach to entrepreneurism is not to have other people tell you what to do, then you won't attract those individuals. It just wouldn't be attractive to someone who's really great. I mean, if we just told you what to do, you never would have come. You never would have come. I mean, and you've been now, you're 27 years into this process, and because working with me and working with Babs, we just said, Shannon, what do you want to do next? That's bigger than what you're doing right now. You couldn't do that if we weren't doing that.
Very true. That's a great point. I'm excited, Dan, because I know this will land with people and they'll have a chance to really experience the full benefit of being an entrepreneur, not just the 1/10 version. So thank you.
Thank you.